Hello and welcome back to MEA Risk Podcasts. My name is Arezki Daoud, and in this second installment on election previews, Alessandro, Bruno and I discuss Algeria. All right, well, let's move to neighboring Algeria. That's a big country. It has all sorts of problems, a lot more stable than Tunisia in that sense. However, we have a president who has not announced his candidacy yet. Our own view of Abdelaziz Bouteflika is that he had a debilitating stroke that rendered him essentially unfit to govern. Yet there is a group of people around him that insists that he is capable and that insists that he runs for a fifth term. Now, he's an 81-year-old man, as you noticed, who not only is physically and mentally challenged.
He's in a wheelchair.
He's in a wheelchair. He's, but whomever is going to take over or replaces himself, he will be, or whomever that person will be, governing a country with a multiplicity of challenges. And 2019 is a big one on many fronts. Economically, we continue to see the volatility of the barrel of oil prices. By volatility, I mean when consumers like that the price is low because they pay lower gasoline prices, exporting countries like Algeria, Nigeria, and the rest tend to suffer. So what is good
we'll see, this is a problem that will affect the other countries we're going to be talking about.
Yes, absolutely. So there is really no clear certainty in terms of where the oil price is headed, but one has to assume that what we saw in 2018 might repeat itself. On the other hand, the U.S. continues to produce more, and so the U.S. being the wild card, any extra production means that OPEC is going to struggle, and Algeria, by extension, is going to struggle. So, having said that, 2019 also comes with the expiration of a number of subsidies that Algeria uses to basically buy peace, social peace. There have been a lot of pronouncements, a lot of decisions in the past 2 years that in 2019 many of the subsidies will be reduced. Some will be completely eliminated in the area of healthcare, in the area of food, commodities and foodstuff, potentially oil and gasoline. And so you find yourself in a situation where revenues are flat to down, spending is down because you have to control your subsidies, and that means support to the population is going to decrease, and that means potentially more social unrest. Now, there is a lot of social unrest in Algeria. I mean, we track that on an ongoing basis, and I can tell you that demonstrations, protests, riots happen in many provinces every day. The only difference between what you see in Algeria and Tunisia is centralized. It's nationwide. These are nationwide protests. In Algeria, they're very localized. Nobody talks about them because they are, let's say a small municipality in the east, where people are very unhappy about social housing or housing allocations, for example. And that translates into closure of local highways. But it's very localized. It's disorganized, and there is no one putting all of that together, which means that the authorities can essentially dictate the outcome of these riots and this unrest. But we're going to see more of that as 2019 unfolds. And finally, there's this election, which has been essentially blocked by the government because Bouteflika has not made any pronouncement about his interest in running. And because of that, it took until last week for the president to to ask the authorities to organize for April 2019, which means that the elections are going to take place. The president hasn't announced that he will run. There have been an uptick in the number of candidates, about 61 of them. 51 of them are independents, clueless people I call them, and get the forms in the papers, but they really are not tied to any political party. They don't have any clout. They don't have any bureaucracy, any support system, any campaign capabilities. But you still have about 10, 11 of them that are tied to political parties and organizations. How important are they? How much of the role they can play? Again, without Bouteflika saying or making the final decision, it's very difficult. That's where the situation is.
On that front, I believe Bouteflika is in a sort of Mubarak situation. In other words, he's there because he represents the interests of the military, which are the real people in charge. And so he's sort of almost, shall we say, a hostage. He's probably going to be forced to run, or someone very much like him will replace, will have to take his place. But I think from what I understand in Algeria, one of the key institutions is the military, as
yes.
It is in Egypt.
Yes. But I'd like to correct you on one area that I think has seen a substantial evolution over the past 4, 5, 6 years, or since Bouteflika took power. I think what he did is he set in motion a process whereby he wanted to, I'm going to use a term I don't even know if it exists in English, but it professionalized, turned the military into a professional corps that would be not involved in politics. And he managed to do so in a great degree by eliminating the prerogatives of what used to be called the DRS, which is the intelligence branch of the military, which basically ruled its own fiefdom. The general in charge, I think his name was Tufik Median, was basically a state within a state. He was able to influence any decision because he has the secret files of everyone. There has been an internal reshuffling of the military over time to basically force the retirement of many of these generals that what you called earlier the powerful elite, to basically a symbolic presence in the political world. And so the military is now in control by a civilian president, much more than the opposite. Now, what happened in the meanwhile is a phenomenon that we've seen in Russia, and that is the influx of so-called oligarchs. The president has a brother who acts who is officially his advisor, and around him, around his brother, is a group of people who basically own all sorts of industrial monopolies, whether it's the imports of sugar or the imports of or large construction companies. These are private business people that have been able to mimic what the oligarchs in Russia have done, and that is create an alliance between a government and a huge private sector, and that is absolutely wreaking havoc because the opposition parties in Algeria know how this game is being played, and they're having terrible time adjusting and figuring out how to counter the oligarchs. If you look at the power base, the support base for Bouteflika's re-election, is obviously the ruling parties. It's a trio of parties, the nationalist parties, but that are financially, economically, in the media, etc., supported by the private sector, and that's in itself an interesting development that we see in Algeria going forward.
What kind of relationship do these oligarchs have with France?
Well, I mean, these guys are absolutely tied to the global economic system. A lot of them, procure their equipment and their know-how, their technology from France. By the way, from Italy, from Germany, from the U.S. These are very much, people who manage multi-billion-dollar companies. I mean, these are, but they do take advantage of their situation to grab state contracts in the construction sector and the oil infrastructure sector. As I mentioned earlier, the monopoly in sugar imports. These are I mean, billions of dollars that
and they are they politically powerful as well as the oligarchs were in Russia?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because some of the oligarchs. This is the controversy between Putin and the West. Putin gathered the oligarchs one day when he took power, and he told them, "You can keep your money, but stay away from politics. Otherwise, I will come after you." Do you think Algeria has someone who could replace Bouteflika? After all, Yeltsin picked Putin specifically, and to perhaps Yeltsin figured out that he allowed too many parties to go on, and he put Putin in charge to clean up the mess. Is there someone who could rein in the oligarchs, to keep them away, basically to tell them, keep your money, go to France and the Côte d'Azur and enjoy yourself and stay out?
Well, that's a very interesting point. I think that the fact that Bouteflika hasn't officially made any pronouncement, that is as long as there is no official position about Bouteflika, that tells you that there's no consensus, that there is a food fight over who each of these men may be supporting. 61 plus candidates tells you that there's no shortage of interested people. Some of them are very good. Some of them have been in politics for decades. And some of them have been part of the system. Ali Ben Flis, who announced his candidacy, even though he promised he wouldn't do it as long as Bouteflika is around, he's today in the opposition, but used to be prime minister. So, there is no shortage of people. The question is, as these secretive debates are taking place, who has the upper hand? Because, let me tell you, the oligarchs do not want any change. And if a change happens,
precisely.
Yeah, if a change happens, it has to be a man that they can control.
Yeah.
And obviously, as much as we believe that the military is standoffish because of the transformation towards more of a professional corps, etc., it's very unlikely that the military is going to stay idle and wait for a bunch of private company owners to decide the future of the country. So we are in a stalemate. And what does that stalemate mean, Alessandro? It means that basically there is no functional, effective constitution in the country. You cannot be in a situation where your president is absolutely physically, mentally incapable of running, that is unfit, and he's not supposed to run for a fifth mandate, but there's still talks that he will. And so there's something deep about that country in terms of the rule of law being essentially non-existent in that sense. This is, if you were in a Western country, this would have been a constitutional crisis. In Algeria, it ought to be considered a constitutional crisis, but nobody talks about that. Everybody's talking about the nitty-gritty, the little details of who's running and
yes,
et cetera.
And in fact, it will be very interesting to see what kind of electoral turnout we get in Algeria.
Yes,
because I think the interesting point, though, the difference between Algeria and Tunisia and the other countries is that Algeria had its spring, or so-called, in the 90s.
Yes, 88 exactly, yep.
In 89 and 88, that was when prices went down, and that's when the government announced cuts to subsidies and increases in the prices of bread and sugar and gasoline, and that's when these strikes happened, and some political change occurred. In fact, we had elections, in 1990, I believe, was the first the elections, and then in 1992 was when the army blocked the Islamists' victory, if I remember correctly. So the country has already gone through that, and I think it's sort of immune to another Islamist-style revolt. And it's had 2 civil wars in the past 60 years.
Yes.
So,
and just to clarify, I think that broadly in the entire region, perhaps with the minor exception of Libya, really, the Islamist insurgency threat has diminished considerably. I mean,
yes.
The political Islam has been incorporated and by extension nullified somewhat. It's been essentially completely wiped out today in Egypt. But it's still. I mean, in Morocco,
being pushed under the carpet in Egypt.
Yeah, at the moment, correct. At the moment, but in general, in Morocco, it's part of the governing. It has been,
co-opted.
Neutralized somewhat by bringing it into government. The prime minister is an Islamist, a member of the PJD Islamist Party, but his prerogatives are very limited, considering that the Interior Ministry, the Foreign Affairs, the military, Foreign Affairs, etc., are the prerogative of the monarchy, and so very limited. Nevertheless, they're there, they're part of the system. In Algeria, it's the same thing. You have a bunch of small political Islamist parties, charismatic leaders. Unfortunately, they really do not form a major opposition to anything, and so is in Tunisia. Nahda is there. It ran the country for a little while, and then it was a disaster, and now it's kind of part of the system, but not part of the system. So however, the militancy, insurgencies still remain a problem, but they remain a problem within the broader Al-Qaeda and the broader Islamic State, not from within the countries themselves.
Yeah, it's the potential for external or extra parliamentary forces to take action here, rather than particularly in Tunisia. But in Tunisia, this phenomenon of people setting themselves on fire.
Yes. By the way, in Algeria too. In Algeria, there was a guy there's a guy who actually just passed away a couple of days ago, yesterday, after he set himself on fire. He's a famous movie director. Who went to the television and asked for to get paid, and he never got paid, and so he decided to go, the fashion way.
That's exactly like the Sidi Bouazid incident.
Yeah, exactly.
In Tunisia, it was a humiliation, a similar humiliation.
Exactly. So in terms of where Algeria is sitting, could it be a time bomb? Possible. On the other hand, that country has always had very secretive, behind closed door type of deals, and so it's possible that its future has been already set, and we don't know it. And that's that's how that country rolls for sure.